So I'm so excited for this conversation because I met Alexis not too long ago. We're both part of a program with a lot of Black women who are doing some really inspiring things, and I needed to talk to her on a more deeper level. And so just to kind of start off and share a little bit, can you share how you decided to become a coach and how you got the title? You need to listen to this: cat herding tech ballerina. I love that.
Yeah, so I tell people all the time that I got into coaching kicking and screaming.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is, upon reflection, it absolutely makes sense that I am where I am, when I look back. But I had been on NYU's, New York University here in New York City, their newsletter for years. Do not recall ever receiving a newsletter. The pandemic hit. They were standing up an inaugural master's program in executive coaching and organizational consulting. Well, consulting is in my background, being that I've been in tech for, close to 20 years. So I was focused on I'm getting a master's in organizational consulting. You see how I, cleverly omit the whole executive coaching, because
mm,
walking in, I thought it was babysitting. That was the mindset that I had for coaching. I don't want to babysit adults.
mhm.
And so fast forward, get into the program, working full time, school full time, an accelerated master's program. And I still don't hear them speaking anything about the organizational consulting component. They're focused on this coaching stuff. I'm like, what is happening? Finally have a conversation with a professor, a woman professor. She was like, Alexis, why are you like so resistant to the coaching? I said, well, number one, I don't want to babysit. I don't babysit adults. Number two, the way you all have been framing up coaching, it's what I've been pushing back against in tech, is that it appears as if you want me to show up within a model ascribed to rigid old white dudes.
Mhm.
I'm like, that's not who I am. That's not my personality. So I don't want anything to do with that. And so what she said next completely blew my mind. She said, Alexis, well, yes, we teach you the framework. We teach you, about the ethical practices and safety of ensuring that your clients and yourself are safe. But who says that you need to show up that way with your clients? You can show up however you want with your clients. I said, what are you talking about, Willis? She said, you can show up the way you need to. If you need to inject your personality, your humor, if that those are the components that make you a coach, then that's what you bring to bear. And when she said that, it was illuminating. It was actually kind of freeing. And then we got into practical, and I realized I like this stuff.
Mm.
Witnessing the transformation of people. Oh my gosh, I've been hooked since 2020.
Yeah. It's really interesting that like your first inclination was this word coach and like what it meant. And it meant
Yes.
basically, one, I heard you say, babysitting,
Mhm.
basically shepherding people who are kind of all willy-nilly. I don't know, I'm just putting that in
Yes.
there,
No, that's correct.
and then also doing it from a framework of modeling, getting them to model old white man behavior. you know
Yes. And what I didn't appreciate was that with all things that I do, and this dovetails into your second question, with all things that I do, I put my Alexis stank on it. I like to tell people that I am the secret sauce, right? And so, how I got the name Cat Herding Tech Ballerina, many people would ask me for years, well, what do you do? Like, I know you're in technology, but it's very difficult for people outside of technology to understand roles that are not technically focused.
Mhm.
And because I sat at the intersection of technology between a client, an engineering team, and a product team, people were like, what is that?
Mhm.
So I came up with a visual. I said, I am a cat herding tech ballerina. And people were like, well, what do you mean? I said, if you conceptualize the visual, if you think of a herd of cats, cats have their own personalities. They all want to go in the direction they want to go in. And as a program and project manager, the leader of these cats, responsible for haranguing them to move in the same direction, coming in under budget, at the deadline, while allowing them to feel as if they are moving in the direction that they want to, not the one that I want them to, as well as running interference when certain cats don't like to play nicely together.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's how I came up with the easiest descriptor to define and describe what my job responsibilities were.
Mhm.
And it seems to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely intention grabbing. And like you said, like cat herding, is in there. I feel like the coaching is in there too, definitely.
It
And
is.
that it's in tech and it's with a finesse. It's with a ballerina-esqueness.
You have to be on your toes.
Yeah, definitely have to be on your toes. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And to just one more thing to add when you say the coaching, and that's why I say with reflection, I recognize that I've coached my entire career because navigating those interpersonal relationships, navigating those difficult client conversations, navigating those experiences when the project did not go according to plan, we were out of scope or over budget. You have to have a certain level of emotional intelligence, a certain level of people skills in order to navigate the personality types so that people ultimately feel seen, heard, and valued, and that they get the sense that you are on their side. You truly want them to win while maintaining your boundaries to yourself, maintaining your integrity to yourself. So, like I said, in reflection and hindsight, I've been coaching my entire career.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like even though you weren't doing this directly, this was kind of what you were meant to be doing in,
Yes,
happening right now,
I absolutely agree.
Um, I also really like on your webpage, on your bio, you talk about a moment in basketball history. I'm a big basketball fan. Where Latrell Sprewell had a little altercation with his coach at the time. So in that kind of, you were talking about, managing budgets, managing personalities, it kind of seemed like he had an episode that happened to him. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about it and why do you think we can learn from what happened to Latrell?
Sure. So just like a 5 minute background, 5 second background for those who aren't aware. So, Latrell Sprewell had a instance where he reached his level of saturation and he laid his hands on his coach. And it resulted in a hefty fine and a suspension. And it was like the talk of the NBA at that time because it was unheard of. And so why I relate it to that is I was so burned out from being all the things, doing all the things, trying to juggle all the things that it felt in many regards like a death by a thousand cuts. Like I could not take one more pressure point. I couldn't take one more. I had one manager in particular, and I remember this vividly. He was a micromanager. And every morning, like I was an early bird, but he was an earlier bird, like turn the lights on in the office type of early. And every morning he would leave a sticky note on my desk and it would just say, "Come see me." Every day.
Oh, wow.
Every day. And it got to the point where I had anxiety walking towards my desk because I knew it would be there. And I knew his expectation was that as soon as I arrived in the building, arrived at my desk, drop my stuff and go see him to talk about the day because he had been there for maybe 45 minutes to an hour. So he's well underway with his day. And I didn't know about boundaries at that point. And how I managed my level of frustration, my level of exhaustion, fatigue, burnout was I let it build up until it got to the point where I threw my hands up. And this was over multiple instances. I threw my hands up and said, "I'm done. I'm going on vacation for a week. I'll see you in a week. I'm done. Goodbye."
Yeah.
That's not healthy.
No,
But
no.
that was how I managed. And I really resonated with the angst and frustration of a Latrell Sprewell because I wanted to lay some hands on my manager. Let me say it that way.
Yeah. I've totally been there. I even in my a previous, corporate career, I had, I would say he was a colleague, but in the interim, he became my boss as we were reorganizing. And um, it was just so awkward around me. The questions he would ask me, they were definitely boundary crossers, and I didn't really know how to respond in the moment. And much like you, I buried it. And it showed up health wise. It showed up in like
Yeah.
sleeping, it showed up in constipation, it showed up in like all these other ways, because
Yeah.
my body was like, you need to get this out, and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately for Latrell, his came out like physically, and
Yes.
he was a talented, great player with like lots of future aspirations and lots of future
Yes.
in the NBA. And what his coach had been doing to him over those times, it ruined his career.
Yes. Yes. It's I'm glad you touched upon the health aspects, because there are many ways to cope when you suppress. There is, okay, well, I'm going to eat my problems away. I'm going to drink my problems away. You know what? I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to deal. I'm going to ignore it. Well, all of those things, as you mentioned, are taking a toll on you physically.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not aware, because you may not be in tune with your body, you don't see the signs until it's too late in some instances. And so I hope people in 2023 are a little bit more mindful of their health, their mental health, their physical health, managing stress, so that it does not get to the point where you explode on someone. You have outlets by which you are letting off steam. You are able to, release some of that tension.
Mm-hmm.
That is my hope in any regard.
Yeah, because I think in 2023, we're getting more cognizant of the word burnout,
Yeah.
and what burnout is. Um, but what does it look like? What could be the telltale signs, either as that person who might be going through burnout, or maybe you're seeing it in someone that you know?
Yeah. So in a few of my clients, I see it as extreme fatigue. Like
Mm,
you cannot seem to get enough sleep. Uh,
mm,
it's apathy towards things that previously gave you pleasure,
mhm,
things that previously gave you joy. It is attempting to do what everyone thinks that they can do successfully, multitask. It is trying to burn the candle at both ends, falsely believing that if I work harder longer just for 15 more minutes, then that somehow translates into getting over the hump. So for many people, it does manifest in different ways. For me, it does manifest in the fatigue, but it also manifests in this like pain across the back of my shoulders, because I hold stress in my shoulders.
mhm, mhm,
And so if I have not gone for a walk in a while, if I've not gotten up from the computer and stretched for a while, if I am at the point where I literally want to scream into a pillow, I know I've reached that threshold where I've taken on too much. And that's the other thing. It can look like your to-do list being the list of things that you can accomplish in a month that you attempt to accomplish in a day, because we overestimate our capacity to complete items.
mhm. Because a lot of that is like, we want to show that we can do it, especially I think as Black women in some of these spaces, like we get roped into that, strong Black woman. We get
Mm-hmm.
lumped into that whole Black excellence narrative,
Mm-hmm.
working twice as hard to get half as much. And that's not sustainable. It was never
No.
meant to be sustainable. It was never meant, those badges were never really meant to like really further our development. I
No.
know I know for me in particular, burnout, it showed up. You talked about the sleep thing, like never getting enough sleep, even
Mm-hmm.
thinking like I would sleep all day Sunday. and still like feel exhausted, right?
Right.
Always perpetually feeling exhausted. And for me, it was actually irritability, I think, a lot of it.
Yep.
Like I did have my outlets to like play sports to kind of get that out. But if I didn't have that opportunity, it showed up as irritability. Like,
Yeah.
I totally remember being in one meeting. I had called it, I had been busy all day, so I hadn't even eaten, and it was like 3 o'clock. And my team came into my office for like a check-in meeting on some project. And they were talking, and then I just said, hey guys, like we can't do this. Like, like I haven't eaten, and everything you're saying to me right now feels like pain. So can we table this to another time? I'm really sorry, but like I think for the benefit of progress, like we can't
Yeah.
have anything right now. I don't want to say anything or do anything that's gonna have not really representative of how I feel about you or this project. But I really sensed I had a lot of like irritability, like
Yeah.
yeah.
And anger, irritability, anger, even loss of appetite. If the way I explain it is like, if you notice that, for example, if normally you are a bubbly person, like you're pretty much go with the flow, okay, life, some hiccups, but for the most part, your personality has remained the same throughout your life. And you notice that you are not who you've been previously, you may have reached your saturation point. And you also brought up a good point about this myth that, okay, I can burn the candle Monday through Friday and I'll just recuperate on Saturday and Sundays. That's not how sleep works. And people are under the misconception that I can operate and exist on 2 hours of sleep during the week, but guess what? I'm going to make up for it by sleeping 12 hours Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is not how the body works. But
Not,
we are conditioned into believing that, based on the fact that for many, uh, worth is tied to productivity.
yeah.
And as you said, especially as Black women, we often will buy into the stereotype that, well, I can do all the things, or if I don't do it, it won't get done.
We'll get done. Yeah, yeah. Ooh, that's a yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. It goes back to what you're saying about boundaries and just like, okay, I have to think about different possibilities here because me getting it done is not going to be one of them.
Well, and we also have to, this is what I have found, because while I coach women, my passion and purpose is to ensure that Black women have a space, they have a coach who looks like them to tell them what they need to hear based on experiences of my own. And the one thing that I found is that we need to be convinced that we are not strong, or we're not as strong as we pretend to be,
Mhm.
because we have bought into, again, the myth that, okay, I can do this thing, I can just juggle one more thing, if I balance this, if I stand on my toes, I can do all of these things. And it's a facade,
Mhm.
because we are trying to do all things instead of taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, realistically, what do I have the capacity for? When I factor in, I need a certain number of hours of sleep, I need a certain amount of time for myself, I need a certain amount of time to experience joy, pleasure, and play in my life. With those hours already allocated towards me, how many hours do I want to give to others as well as my job? But the challenge in a lot of instances is that I was having this conversation with a prospective client, and she was saying that it's very challenging because as a Black woman, she has to fight all the time. And I said, I understand that. I said, but when do you fight for yourself?
Mhm.
I said, when have you been taught, programmed, indoctrinated into fighting for yourself? And she paused and she said, never. She's been taught to fight for others,
Yeah.
with herself not on her list at all.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be convinced that we're not as strong as we think we are in order to move ourselves, not even to the head of our list, to our list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I often, like, even I reflect upon myself. I think some of it sometimes stems from, even growing up in Caribbean households. I'm going to speak for what I have seen, my lived experience, where, your voice is kind of not, children should be seen and not heard.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to do this for me, or, there's boundary violations where nothing is ever private, but everything is secret, so I think you kind of grow up knowing that, okay, I'm here to help for other people, especially as women in women growing up. I'm here to help other people, but it's like, if I keep going this way, when is it my turn? Like, to put myself first. And it's a really difficult adjustment that you have to make for yourself. You have to be the one to say, no, I'm gonna do things differently. I'm gonna actually put myself first. And that doesn't mean that, what I'm doing, is disrespectful to you. It's that I need to respect myself, but I'm also,
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that you say that, because the one thing that I work with my clients on, and they are not happy about it at all, but it has to be done. It's getting comfortable disappointing people. Because again, a lot of Black women have been conditioned into people pleasing, into proving that they are worthy of something in exchange for something else. What did we talk about before we started? That transactional relationship.
Yep.
And so when you get comfortable in the fact that your life decisions are inevitably going to disappoint someone, there's a level of freedom that comes with that, because you're not navigating life based on the sole expectation that someone will like your decisions, because you go in knowing there's going to be someone who doesn't like it. And I liken it to, there's a phrase in one Jill Scott song where she says, you could be the juiciest peach, and there's always going to be someone who does not like peaches.
And so where's the nectarine?
Right. So why are you trying to make yourself a nectarine when you are a peach? Go find and associate with people who like peaches.
Yeah. And this leads back to I love this catchphrase. So if anyone's listening, you need to be following Alexis on LinkedIn. You speak about being bidirectional and beneficial when it comes to relationships, when it comes to, these types of transactions. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I grew up as an only child. I grew up around a lot of adults. And so I was that kid, as you mentioned earlier, who was in the corner, seen, not heard, right? And so I spent a lot of time by myself, and I like my company. Well, what that means is I never had like a large tribe of friends growing up. So the people that are close to me are people who I have come to know, I've come to learn from, grow with, their family. And so when I see people who are wanting to make an attachment to you, to have proximity to you for the sole purpose of getting something out of it, I say, no, that does not work for me. Like, if you're in my sphere, whether that's personal or professional, that relationship must be bidirectional and beneficial. I must be giving something to you, and you must be giving something to me. And it's not this exchange that we say, hey, I am giving you X, you providing me with Y. No, it's just we forged and fostered a relationship whereby we mutually pour into one another. Those are the types of relationships that I foster. And so, how that came about on LinkedIn is that I began to notice that people, and it's fine, however people use LinkedIn is how they use LinkedIn. Um, but I know how I use LinkedIn. And so people were sending connection requests and saying, hey, you need to follow me because I want more of you.
Yeah. Oh God. And the tagging you, and you're not the subject of the post. Like,
Right,
you know,
right.
I had to call someone who did that to me the first time. I was like, do not do that. And I probably even gave him the reasons why I thought you should not be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second time I was like, I told you to stop. And that was it, you know?
Right.
And he said, well, I'm just doing that because then, it'll be seen by more people. I was like, so you want to step on my back so that you could be seen
Yes.
by more
And
people?
and that's not bidirectional nor beneficial.
Uh,
And people, what I found is like I used to think my mom was, oh my gosh, I thought she was the most radical parent ever. But she's at least as far as I know, she's always been very grounded in who she was. She would say things and mean it. There was no explanation. I said what I said because that's what I mean. And so I have become aware, especially on LinkedIn, that when you stand up for yourself, when you say that this is my boundary and you will not cross it, people are, ooh, they get in their feelings. And it's just a wild experience that adults are throwing temper tantrums.
yeah. I think we need to be more like that. I've noticed in myself too, like instead of really clearly saying, no, or that's not going to work for me, or whatever is the most appropriate thing. I used to do this thing. I wouldn't say used to. Sometimes I do this thing where I'm given a maybe, but it really is a no. And I'm
Mm,
expecting the other person to just kind of interpret this,
yeah.
so that's definitely something that I'm working on. And I know it has roots in people pleasing. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm working on.
Well,
I
let me tell you, like I told one of my clients a couple weeks ago, avoidance is not a boundary. Like, yes, it would be fantastic if people inferred what we meant, if they picked up the social, the context clues that we give off. It would be fantastic if they did that. When people are focused on themselves, they aren't seeing your context clues. And
Mhm.
so it is our responsibility to communicate that this does not work for me. And the one thing that I try to impart in a lot of Black women is, a lot of things can be negotiable in life because ultimately you want them to be win-win. But the one thing that should never be negotiable is your no. If
Mm,
you say no to something, if you say no, don't do this, if you say no, stop this, no, I don't want to do that, there's no negotiating from that position because I've already communicated to you what I do not want. And you have to trust and believe that I put some thought into why I'm saying no.
mhm, mhm.
And that is very difficult, like you said, for a lot of people due to that the undercurrent of people pleasing.
People pleasing and not knowing that you can say no to these things, and the consequences may not be that they are no longer going to like you, they are no longer going to help you or love you or whatever that consequence is. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's great that you're coaching, and particularly Black women, because we do encounter, I think, a lot of unique experiences in the workplace. We're often the only one, you know,
Yes,
microaggressions.
yes,
Even there's this whole narrative around hair and what is quote unquote professional.
yes.
And sometimes, like, even amongst other women, whether they be Black, whether they be white or anything else,
Mm-hmm.
solidarity amongst women when, it sometimes is just not there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just talk a little bit about how we can navigate these experiences if our goal is to actually climb a corporate ladder?
I say, first of all, it's kind of like a 1 and a 1A. Understand that there will be some sacrifice. Like, just going in, there's something that you will need to sacrifice in exchange for what you want. Now, the 1A is know and understand who you are, such that you define what you're willing to compromise or sacrifice in exchange for what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Because allowing someone to determine who you are, what you are, you'll wind up being all things to everyone and no one to yourself. So going in, understand sacrifices will be made. You have to determine what you're willing to sacrifice by when. So for example, if you want a director position, okay, and you have 2 small children at home, okay, maybe your sacrifice is that you may not be able to attend all of your children's plays, all of your children's soccer games. Are you okay with that? And if you are, that's fine. That does not mean you won't, if you sacrifice one thing, you automatically get the other, or vice versa. It means that at certain points, there will be an exchange. There will be a price you must pay, and you have to be willing to pay it. Now, taking that same example, if you know who you are and you say, you work out with your family, okay, well, I don't want to miss more than 2 soccer games a month. Great. You've now identified a boundary such that when work issues present themselves, you will be able to stand up and say, hey, I can't do that. I've already missed, whatever my threshold is for the month. I got to go. And you're comfortable with that. And you're comfortable if there are any consequences that are that a result from you saying, this is what my boundary is. Knowing who you are, having that foundation of confidence, that foundation of courage, that foundation of compassion and self-love, I think are key, because walking into these spaces, especially if you don't have a support system outside of work, you're going to need to fortify yourself in some way. So if you can find a community outside of work, great. I wouldn't go into your workplace expecting that to happen. If it happens organically, that's great. But I personally would not walk in expecting to find, your BFFs at your place of employment. And the other thing I would say is, we need to understand when to disconnect from the job. Mm-hmm. We need to understand when the job is the job and we as a whole human are separated. Our worth, our existence, our humanity is not tied to our title. It's not tied to our salary. It's not tied to our employer. But unfortunately, we as a society have gotten to this place where people feel, well, I work at Google, and so therefore I am X. And then once you lose that position at Google, you're unmoored, because your identity is tied to being that type of employee with that title. You are more than that. So walk in the door having an expectation that this is a job. You are a business entity partnering for whatever length of time that you stay at that employer with another business entity. You're working to gather as much as you can for your business entity of one, you, whether that be learning and development, travel, promotions, whatever the case may be. Walk in with a plan to identify what you're leaving with. Skills, money, what are you leaving with? And I think a lot of people do not walk in with a plan.
Yeah. And I take your point around not necessarily thinking that you're going to find your BFF in the workplace, and mm-hmm. cultivating those, bidirectional and beneficial relationships outside of mm-hmm. work. And, it could still be on your professional development path, but really cultivating those relationships. And going back to burnout, I think if you start to notice those kind of relationships suffering, I think that could also be another indicator.
Yeah, that's part of the sacrifice too. Like if you notice that those relationships are suffering, are you okay with that? But that does require, constant check-in with yourself. You need to be self-aware enough to recognize, well, wait a minute, I haven't talked to my actual BFF in a month. Am I okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not, then what action am I going to take to rectify?
Yeah, exactly. And it's to be constantly aware of that, to knowing, that these things are happening, listening to your body, whatever you're doing around that, and identifying it, that's an area where you want to set a boundary and go about setting a boundary. So,
Yes.
so would you describe, would you describe that being one of the major challenges for Black women to advance in the workplace and achieve their goals? Or what would be the major challenge in your view?
Um, I say it's twofold. Number one, it's gatekeepers within organizations,
Mm,
whether those gatekeepers are other Black women, whether they are white women, whomever those gatekeepers are. And then the second is Black women themselves. In that, going back to our earlier part of our conversation, where, many women grow up thinking they are in service, they are meant to be in service of others. So that is a mindset that carries forward with you. So when you walk into these corporate spaces and you have an understanding that being selfish is some derogatory moral failing, and you're leaning in trying to help everyone else, you are not promoting yourself. You're not being visible for promotions. You're not always taking on stretch assignments. And some of that, again, has to do with that mindset, and also the mindset that I don't belong. I'm not worth this. I'm not competent enough. And I will tell you, most of my clients are dual degreed. No client of mine has less than 2 masters.
yeah, yeah.
So when I work with my clients, the first thing I say is that is absolute BS. I'll keep it clean. It's BS, because there's no way that you can get a PhD from Columbia University and not be smart.
Yeah.
You are playing in your own face. Stop that. So it's that belief that we are smart in one area, but not this other area, based on limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes back to that belief that we need to be strong. We have to give this perception that we can handle all the things.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say, I don't know, but let me figure out how to do it. And stop holding up the pretense that I am strong. Of course I have it together. Of course I'll figure it out. Some days you may, some days you might not. And both days are okay. So I would say, Black women getting out of their own way and gatekeepers are two of the barriers that I see as preventing some of us from climbing as high as we want. Because you also have to have the underpinning for a lot of the mindset is fear. Well, I want to be a director. Well, what if I get it? What then? And
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, that's great. That's awesome. I can appreciate that. But we're not there yet. We haven't even formulated a plan to establish a pathway to director role. So we get in our heads with the mind chatter about what this thing could be when we have not taken step one towards that goal. So we psych ourselves out before we even get in the game. And I want us to dial it back and remain present. In this moment, you are not a director. So all those thoughts that you have of what could happen as a director do not exist. Those thoughts in your heads, they're actually lies.
Could we unpack that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, I don't know whose the quote is. It's not the fear of getting there. It's the fear of what happens when you get there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to be a different person? Are you going to not be spending time with like your friends? Like, do you have to have a whole other set of friends? Like, I think sometimes that is also a fear of climbing the corporate ladder or
Yeah.
being ambitious. Like, how is it going to change you? I do think that's a legitimate fear, that it would be
Yeah.
hard to want to progress without actually kind of taking a step back and thinking about how that might derail your pathway.
So when I work with my clients, before we get to coaching, we go through what I call the values Thunderdome, meaning we get clear on what your values are. So at the end of that exercise, my clients will walk away with like their top 3 values. And I think of values as your North Star. They're what you anchor towards when the seas are stormy. They guide you in the night when there is very, very little light.
Mm-hmm.
They are your anchors when all feels lost. So if, for example, you say, you know what, peace is my number 1 value. That is what I need to feel at home in my body, in as I exist in the world. That's what I need. I need peace. However, we see that your actions, let's just take your actions on this fictional path towards directorship. Your actions and your interactions are less than peaceful. So at that point, we already recognize that there's a misalignment. There is the alignment towards, hey, this is this goal that I want. My actions are not aligned with what I say is important to me, AKA my value of peace. So tying it back to your question of, well, how am I going to be when I change into this new role, this director role? If you understand who you are, if you understand what your non-negotiables are, if you understand what your values are, and you are consistently checking in with yourself and checking whether something is in alignment or out of alignment for your path forward, you should not arrive at that director position with this brand new individual, this new person who you are unfamiliar with, because you are doing the work along the way to ensure that you remain aligned with who you are and who you want to be, who you say you are. Actions and words are aligned. Now, for some people, that's easier said than done, because for many people, money is their value. And that's okay. There are no judgments when it comes to values. But again, there are always sacrifices. If money is your value, what do you sacrifice in exchange for it? Similarly, if peace is your value, but you know, I want this director role, and I know that I work with some folks who are a little unscrupulous. Okay. If you plan to be out of alignment with your value, are you okay with that? And for how long? So these are negotiables that you have to reconcile with yourself as it relates to how you move forward. No one can tell you, here's the playbook step by step. And once you arrive in this director role, guess what? It's magical. You are transformed. You have to go through some stuff in order to arrive at that destination and learn about yourself along the way. Mm-hmm. It's self-discovery it's a lifelong journey. It does not begin or end working with a coach, any sort of coach.
Yeah, for sure. Like I always thought, like because I played sports my young life, and a coach is there to help you see how to get the best out of you.
Right.
They're not on the field. They're not playing the game at all.
No.
So it's really important to know that whether or not you have a coach, that is your job, is to get the best out of you. If it is, it aligned with your values? Is it aligned with the goals that you have with your life?
Right. Because if you think about Kobe Bryant, what you put into coaching is what you get out of coaching. Kobe Bryant had a coach, and his coach took him through practices and drills. But guess what Kobe did? He also put in the effort and energy into additional practices, additional reps, because he wanted more out of the game. He wanted to maximize his own potential in addition to what his coach was maximizing, helping him to maximize. It's the same way with any sort of coach that you work with. You have to do the work. I tell people we are not magicians. Like the magic of coaching does not happen within the session. It happens outside the session. My sessions are 60 minutes. Do you realistically think in 60 minutes with one human being, you are going to transform your entire life if you've lived with these protective or survival mechanism behaviors for years? Do you think 60 minutes, 3 times a month, is going to transform your life that magically? No, it's a process. And I think that's where there's a little bit of misunderstanding when it comes to what a coach does and what a coach does not do.
So could you describe what your coaching philosophy is and your approach
Sure. So, my philosophy. I say that I am a straight, no chaser type of coach, meaning I don't sugarcoat it for you. If you say that a word means X, I do work to get clarity because I want to understand what language you're using. But if I hear a conflict or a contradiction in what you're saying, I'm going to spotlight it. So my philosophy is that what you focus on is what ultimately is resolved and revealed and resolved. My approach with my clients is I hold up a mirror and I highlight truths that are uncomfortable for some. I am never mean-spirited. I operate from a position of kindness and support, but I ask tough questions. And they are in support of my clients, specifically Black women, seeing themselves in the way that I see them, as phenomenal and able to live life, go out there and grab their dreams and do it in ways that are authentic and empowering for their lives.
Okay. I liked how you talked about being a straight talker, a straight shooter, a drink, no chaser.
And it doesn't work for all people. I recognize that.
I agree with you. It definitely doesn't. I agree. I think you have to know your audience 100%.
Correct.
If you're going to be talking like that. But at the same time, I'm linking this to a situation that I will talk about, because I've always learned to be a straight talker, just because you only get so much of someone's attention. So there's not enough time to be dilly-dallying. Like, sort of tell them what they need to know.
Right.
What they need to know now. But that's literally been my lived experience. So when someone talks to me like that, I don't find it's rude. I find it's great. Like, I remember once talking to a mentor. He's still a mentor, but I have different mentors now. But I was talking to him and he was like, okay, this new role that you're going after, like, what are you worried about? I was like, I just don't know, these politics of like not really saying what you really want to say. Like, I can't take it anymore. Like, I have no idea, like, like, to try and get clarification. It was just, I was noticing that definitely in corporate, that people have this thing where, like, they're not actually saying what they mean, because their actions later on, they either don't do what they said in the room, or they do the exact opposite of what they said in the room. And I was like, I'm just not used to that. I'm used to like that straight talking. And in my new roles, I'm more of a board member. And I in a board in a one of the committee meetings, they asked for feedback, how did the meeting go? Da da da. I was like, okay, here's my feedback. It got to me. I was like, here's my feedback, XYZ, and the chair of that committee was like, oh, like though his reaction to my feedback, I just realized, I was like, oh, you'd asked for feedback. I gave you feedback. He's like, well, we need to take this offline. Why don't you write out an email that details all of your feedback? And I was like, no. I was like, here, I'll say it again for you slower. You want to write it down, and we could have a meeting about it. But I'm not going to be like, I didn't say this part, but in my head, I was like,
yeah,
why do I gotta take the time and write all this out? Like, no, So we did actually have that follow-up conversation. And, I had like sat in meditation for a little while to like help my ancestors to help me be with my words. And I gave him the feedback. And like after that meeting, he was like very like, okay, like I see what you're saying. I can see how it was just a very interesting conversation of being a straight talker and getting the reaction that like, no, you're not actually supposed to be telling us.
which is it's such a disconnect when you don't operate that way, because you're trying to understand, well, what was the purpose of asking for feedback if you don't want feedback?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was just okay. I was like, okay, well, it's not going to stop me from giving my feedback again. But I think meetings like that, I've learned what I'm taking away is like just meditate beforehand, to like for everything in your mouth to be taken with like in good regard.
Well, I think it's funny that you say that, because I'll ask people, hey, how are you doing? No, people will ask me, hey, how are you doing? And I always try to take a second to check in with myself to find out in that moment, how am I feeling? And so for the last time I did this, I took a couple seconds and I really thought, like, okay, I'm okay. I'm doing well. And so they were taken aback that I paused. I said, well, by habit, we have become socialized into, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Great. And that's it. I said, if you ask me a question, my authentic self is going to tell you how I am. How you respond to that, that's on you. Maybe that teaches you to ask your questions differently. Or if you are not invested in the response, don't ask the question. And so she said, wow, you've disrupted my train of thought. Great.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because when someone does ask a question, you want to give them an answer. But if the question is how you're doing and you just want to keep moving on, it's like, that's not really polite. That's not really nice. Like
I absolutely agree. I think, going back to your point about like why a lot of people may not feel comfortable with questions, especially in the coaching relationship, is because for some people, the word lie is a very strong word. So I'm just going to say that, off the bat. When you lie to yourself for so long and you have someone who asks you a question that challenges those lies, you are uncomfortable because you're presented with something that is very comforting and comfortable to you. So you're trying to hold on to it. And in some instances, you're trying to prove that this lie you've told to yourself over the years is in fact a truth. And it's like, I don't have an investment in whether you lie to yourself or not. I'm simply trying to get clarity on whether that is true or not. If you say that you can't do something, and I'm asking you, is that true? Like, are you physically unable to do it? Or you've mentally checked yourself out and you have chosen not to do it because of the fear? I'm seeking clarity, and that makes people uncomfortable. But that's what coaching is. Coaching is not unicorns. It's not rainbows. It can be sometimes, but coaching is uncomfortable. And there's an emotional component. If you've not had an opportunity to sit and reflect on what you want, it can bring up a lot of emotions for people.
Yeah, so I could see how like every executive, you know, even not even at the level of executive, you need a coach, you know. I know in some organizations it's a requirement. But also at the same time, we've been talking about a lot of issues like people pleasing that could stem from situations that arose way before you were in the workforce. I'm wondering what's your thoughts on like getting a coach versus getting a therapist? Like, you know, what would be the situations where you might, instead of really wanting to see a coach, that you might need to actually see a therapist?
So, two immediate thoughts. Number one, I immediately think of the meme of the little girl, why not both? Number one, and someone asked me this question earlier today. And so the way I think of it is I would say 80% of my clients have both a coach and a therapist. I have both a coach and a therapist. They can work independently of one another. So the way I explain the differences is that therapy or therapists work with you to overcome obstacles related to past traumas, traumatic experiences, childhood abuse, things of that nature, working to uncover why those experiences still present or manifest in your life today. Coaches co-create what I call like a spaciousness for future forward goals. Now, there is some overlap. Let's just take the people pleasing as an example. As a coach, we don't necessarily get into the granular details of, hey, how did your mom and dad show up with you, you know, to such that you arrive to become a people pleaser? What we do is we determine, okay, what aspects of people pleasing kept you safe as you developed and matured into an individual. Okay, so we now have the awareness that people pleasing is a protective measure. How do we dismantle it so that we move forward? What is underneath the people pleasing? Is it that you weren't heard? Is it that you feel as if speaking up has some sort of consequence? Okay, great. Let's figure out how we can channel that and work forward. And as a coach, once we unlock some of those obstacles, those big obstacles, what I find is that it unlocks other aspects of your life. Because I tell people I'm not a career coach. What I do is I help you look at all facets of your life so that if there are obstacles, because people feel that they can compartmentalize themselves, personal and professional, you can't, but that's a whole other conversation. But it helps you unlock those domains and facets of your life. Because if you have the confidence, the esteem, the belief that you are worth all of the things that life has to offer, that you are worthy of taking up as much space as the universe, you can go out and climb mountains, literally and figuratively. So that the coaching relationship, how I show up, is about helping you to take whatever those protective obstacles are, understanding where they've served you. Let's mourn them, leave them where they are, and implement some tools, behavior modifications, so that we can move forward and take over the world.
Okay. So there's never been anyone who's come to you where they didn't have a therapist, and maybe you were like, actually, this is maybe not an Alexis thing. This is a therapist thing.
So the way I work with clients is, before you hand me any money, we need to talk.
Okay.
because I need to understand a couple things. I need to understand that you are ready for coaching. You may think you're ready for coaching, but if I don't see that there's that desire, that motivation, that drive to change, you're not ready for coaching. B, you may have, like, I did have one individual who reached out to me and was experiencing, wanted my help navigating depressive mood swings that they were working through. That is not my ministry. That is not what I do. I don't even pretend. And so in that instance, I said, because I am a very ethical individual, I'm not taking your money just to take your money. I explained to her, while I would love to work with you, I don't believe that I can offer you the support that you need. I don't have experience with depression. So I don't want us to be in a situation where I may potentially exacerbate whatever symptoms you're experiencing, but I can help find, that support that you need. And she was totally okay with it. She understood. So I know what lane I operate in and what lane is not mine at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That totally makes sense. I just also feel like, as sometimes, I don't want to speak for other people, but sometimes with Black women, or, Black communities in general, we have a resistance to therapy. And the fact that you stated that most of the people you work with, they have both, so I really feel that's a stigma that we need to break down. Hopefully it comes with more therapists that represent us and look like us.
Yes.
That we get more comfortable with the idea of talking about problems and not talking about challenges, and that are still showing up for us today. And getting therapy for that. I have a therapist. I love my therapist. Although I probably
love mine too.
That because if I love her too much, then she can't be my therapist.
Well,
I'm just joking.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I tell my clients all the time, hey, because I understand, like, I've been coached before. I am coached. So I understand the discomfort when someone asks you a question and it, cracks open a part of you that you thought you had closed off because it was too painful to deal with. So I understand what that feels like. And so when I give my clients exercises and they are experiencing discomfort, I like to tell them, look, if you don't hate me at least once, 2, 3 times along this relationship, then I'm not digging deep enough. I'm not helping move the needle, because coaching is not about us sitting on a Zoom or, whatever, keying for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
You are paying me for results. You are paying me such that at the beginning of our time together, you feel X way. And by the time we're done, you feel Y way. And within that space of time, there's some hard things that you must do. And I need to ask you to do those hard things and ask you those hard questions. So you're going to hate me. It's inevitable.
It's so true. It's so true. Like, I don't know about hate, but like, I'm definitely gonna look at you a little side eye, because you just keep cutting into the core of me, taking it out and making me look at it.
Look, my client today sent me a text. She said, Alexis, I say this with all sincerity. You are blowing up my life in ways that are to my betterment. She was like, they are so unexpected. I don't like it, but it is for my greater good. Aw, thank you.
It's so good. It's so good.
I love what I do.
I think of everything that we've been talking about. There's a role to mindfulness, and understanding emotions.
Yeah.
Can you expand on how that plays a role, mindfulness and, emotional intelligence, or, being aware of emotions in leadership and leadership and in coaching?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people have the misconception that mindfulness is your woo woo woo, sitting on a pillow for 90 minutes and not moving. And there is not space for many people to appreciate that mindfulness, as well as meditation, takes different forms. And so at the highest level, mindfulness is about being mindful, aka excuse me, aka being present to the moment. And so what that means is our mind chatter, our thoughts, I call them squirrels. I say that we have squirrels living in our head. That mind chatter can get so far down the road of what could be. How do I do this? What happens? Who do I become when I arrive in this director role? Your thoughts have played out this entire scenario that is not rooted in reality. The only reality we have is the present moment. But we distract ourselves so much from what's in the present because it feels more comfortable, as crazy as it sounds, to live in that future state that doesn't exist instead of the current state where we have to navigate those emotions. So emotional intelligence, it depends, to me, it depends on the person that you speak to, but I think it's having the awareness that you have emotions. And for Black women, that is very difficult to acknowledge, that you have emotions, you feel pain, you feel sadness, you feel loneliness. And being able to say that out loud without the attachment of shame, without the fear of judgment, the recrimination of someone perceiving you to be a certain way. That's a whole other conversation. We place too much value on what other people think of us. But emotional intelligence, to me, goes hand in hand with self-awareness. Who are you? Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? Regardless of what society says you should, be, do, how you should show up. What do those definitions mean for you? How do you want to convey emotion? How do you want emotion conveyed to you? How do you want it expressed to you? But a lot of times when you're not in the moment, focused on feeling instead of distracting when you feel uncomfortable, feeling instead of picking up your phone when you're angry, feeling instead of going for my old favorite, a glass of wine, sitting in that, excuse my French, sitting in that shit
Yeah.
and experiencing it and letting it and having the awareness that being human is experiencing emotions. We are not robots. This plays back into that I'm strong. I can compartmentalize my personal from my professional. My emotions have no place in these things. That's not how humans operate. And so as a leader, especially if you're a leader, if you want to be a leader of people, you need to understand that how you lead and how you work are different from the people you lead. I advise, anyone who wants to lead people, talk less, listen more, understand your people, invest in your people. The how I showed up as a manager, a director, a leader was based on all of the crap that I navigated with horrible leaders. And I promised myself I would never do that. But it also was why I was resistant to being a leader for so long, because I'm like, I didn't want to do that.
We need to see possibility models. We really
yes,
do. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I cut you off there though.
No, I was just gonna say, but having the capacity to feel emotion and allowing others to express their emotions, especially as a leader, will ultimately, in my experience, will win you more points with your team than anything else. If you can find a way to make your team feel seen, heard, and valued, they will be loyal to you.
Yeah, it goes back to that quote. People might not remember what you said, people might not remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely.
And I definitely think as Black women, this is something that I worked on early in like my therapy journey, was that there are more emotions than happy, sad, and angry. And like to understand what they are and to help identify them. They have distinct feelings in the body, and you can go deeper in terms of what emotions are.
And if that means you need to go to Google and download the emotion wheel, there is no shame in that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if all you know is happy, sad, and angry, there's some exposure that is required.
There's so many feelings out there, you know. It gets easier the more that you sit with it,
Yes.
the more that you identify it, you know, you get to understand, and you get to quickly identify those emotions, and hopefully
Yeah.
closer to the moment that you are experiencing them, you know.
You have to be willing to do that work though, too, because it's not always fun, comfortable, or easy. And if you go into the process understanding that this is a journey, meaning you will discover things about yourself, and you may modify your behavior, you may modify your thought processes, and that's fantastic. Well, guess what? Because you're constantly evolving and growing, in 6 months, you're a completely different person. So you have to rediscover who you are and relearn who you are, and potentially, unlearn some patterns of behavior. So this is an ongoing cycle of discovering yourself. It does not end until they kick dirt over you.
Oh man. Oh, so yeah, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I know we gotta kind of wrap this up. We've been talking for a little while now. But I do like that what we're talking about is eventually exploring having different people in leadership positions, people who are probably underrepresented today, Black women, people of color, people with just on different paths, doing different lived experiences. Are there any suggestions in how we can change corporate environments to be more receptive to underrepresented leaders, particularly women executives and leaders?
I am rarely speechless, but I am an eternal optimist, Leanne. I hope one day corporate structures are more welcoming of, underrepresented populations. I don't have an answer of what makes them more welcoming of differing groups, because the trend right now does not feel as if it's leaning in that direction. It really, and I can only speak for technology specifically, where it started off as, the group of nerds who were not planning to do any harm. And it has rapidly moved towards this capitalistic engine whereby it is profit, profit, profit.
Mm-hmm.
And homogenous population, homogenous culture seems to be acceptable, and dare I say, the goal. So I don't know how to change this ship. I am hopeful. But I've seen so many people go into the engine idealistic, hoping to change it, and ultimately get burned out, get stressed out, get chewed up, and then get spit out.
Mm-hmm.
So I too am at a loss for how we change this machine.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I always worry about tasking the people who are most victimized
with the solution.
coming up with the solutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for that answer. Which brings me to my last question.
Yeah.
And it's I'm looking for a one-word answer here.
Okay.
It's really to complete the sentence. Wealth is
Freedom.
freedom. Okay.
I was torn between freedom and liberation.
Ooh, I love that word liberation too. Okay, freedom. Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. Really much enjoyed it. I know we have a part 2 coming. I know, I feel it. I feel it. So thank you, Alexis.
You're welcome. I am happy to come back. If your audience has questions, I am happy to come back.
Okay, amazing. This has been another episode of the No Boss of Me podcast. I'm Leanne Hanaway, money coach, wealth educator, and chartered professional accountant. If you have feedback on today's episode, don't forget to rate us and review us wherever you get your podcast. You can also DM us on Instagram at NoBossOfMe. We'd love to hear from you. Please join us again next time for more on investing to build wealth, navigating personal finance, and talking to women entrepreneurs who are changing our world with confidence. Thanks for listening.